The first apple hit the ground before the sun did. Silas Kade heard it from the porch, that soft, wet thud of a wine sap breaking against packed dirt. And he set his coffee cup down slow, the way a man sets down a thing he might need to pick up again in a hurry. He was 61 years old, and he had not fired the sharps in 11 years. But a man who lives alone learns the sound of his own orchard the way a mother learns the breathing of her child. Something was in among his trees, and it was small, and it was hungry. He came off the porch without his boots. Just wool socks against the frost-hard earth, the barrel of the rifle pointed at the sky, his silver hair loose around a face weathered the color of oiled walnut. The Colorado dawn was the color of a bruise turning gold. Behind him, the ranch house sat quiet as a held breath. The house he had built for a wife who was buried under the cottonwood, and for a son who was buried in a field in Tennessee, and for a daughter who had never been born at all. He circled the shed. He circled the smokehouse. He came around the north corner of the orchard, and there she was. A girl, 9, maybe 10, barefoot in a dress that had once been blue and was now the color of creek mud. Her arms full of apples she could not possibly carry, her mouth full of one she was eating so fast she was choking on it, tears running down her face while she ate. Not from sadness, he understood at once, but from the shame of being that hungry in front of another human being. She saw him. She froze. The apples tumbled out of her arms and rolled around her bare feet, like small red planets losing their orbit. She did not run. She could not. Her legs, he saw, were shaking too hard to hold her. Silas Kade lowered the rifle. He looked at this child. He looked at the apple still gripped in her small, dirty fist. He looked at the sky, which had turned the exact shade of pink his wife Marta had loved, back when there were still things to love. "Sit down," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. He tried again, softer. "Sit down, child, and eat more. There's a whole tree of them, and only one of me. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Put the kettle on if you haven't yet. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from, because we love knowing who's with us at this hour. Now let me tell you about the girl in the orchard, and the man who found her, and how the mercy of one cold morning changed everything that came after. Her name was Wren Halloran. He got that much out of her over a bowl of oatmeal, sitting at the kitchen table that had not seated another living soul in 9 years. She ate with both hands. She ate like the food might be taken away between one spoonful and the next. She ate until she was sick into the wash basin, and then she cried because she had wasted it, and then Silas fed her again, slower this time, a little at a time, the way you feed a foal that has been too long without milk. She had come, she said, from the county home over in Trinidad. 2 days walking. She had run because a man named Mr. Beeman had come to look her over for what he called light work, and she had seen his hands, and she had known. She did not explain what she had known. She did not have to. Silas Kade had spent 40 years reading the faces of horses and men, and he understood exactly what a girl of 9 had known about a man like Beeman. "They'll come looking," he said. "Yes, sir," she said. And then, because she was 9 and could not help it, "Please don't send me back." He did not answer. He got up, and he built the fire higher, and he stood a long time looking into it. Outside, the mountains that fenced the Sangre de Cristo Valley were catching the first real light. He thought about his wife Marta, dead of the fever in 1878. He thought about his son Tobias, who had ridden off to a war his father had begged him not to fight, and had been buried where he fell. He thought about all the years he had told himself that a man alone was a man at peace. He turned around. The girl was asleep at the table, her cheek in a puddle of milk, her small dirty hand still curled around the spoon. "I won't send you back," he said, to no one, to himself, to Marta under the cottonwood. "I don't reckon I could if I tried." He carried her to the small bedroom that had once been meant for a daughter and had never held one. He laid her on the quilt Marta had stitched with her own name in the corner. He pulled off her ruined shoes and saw the blood on the linen. And he sat down on the edge of the bed, and he did not cry, because Silas Kade had forgotten how, but something inside him that had been packed in ice for a decade began, very slowly, very quietly, to thaw. The riders came on the 3rd day. He saw them from the ridge where he was mending fence. 4 of them, moving up the wagon road at an easy pace, the way men move when they believe the thing they are chasing cannot possibly run. He came down off the ridge quiet. He put Wren in the root cellar with a candle and a heel of bread and the small wooden horse Tobias had carved when he was 8 years old. Don't come out, he said. Not for any voice. Not even mine, unless I say the word Cottonwood. You hear? Cottonwood, she whispered. He closed the door. The man in front was tall and thin, dressed better than a lawman had any right to be. He introduced himself as Josiah Beeman, deputy of the county home board, and he introduced the three men behind him as concerned citizens, which is what powerful men have always called the men they pay to hurt people. Silas looked at their hands, at their boots, at the way their horses stood. He did not offer them water. Girl run off, Beeman said. 9 years old. Halloran. You seen her? I've seen a lot of things, Silas said. Beeman smiled with the top of his mouth only. Old man alone out here. Big place. Could use a set of small hands, I imagine. Cooking. Mending. Keeping the house. I keep my own house. So you say? Beeman leaned on his saddle horn. The thing about a girl like that, Mr. Kade, she belongs to the county. Property, in a manner of speaking. Anyone found harboring her, well, that's a theft charge. Could take a ranch off a man. Small ranch like yours. Silas had spent his life around cattle, and he knew the exact moment a bull decides it is going to charge. He felt that moment now, in his own chest, and he pushed it down the way a man pushes a stove, door shut on flame. I haven't seen your girl, he said. But if I do, I'll bring her in myself. Beeman studied him a long time. Then he nodded, slow. You do that, Mr. Kade. You do that. Because I would truly hate, to have to come back here with paper. They rode off. Silas stood in the yard until the dust had settled and the birds had begun to sing again. Then he went to the root cellar, and he opened the door, and he said the word Cottonwood, and a small pale face lifted up out of the dark and looked at him with the exact expression Marta had worn on the day he had asked her to marry him. The look of someone who has just been given a thing they had stopped believing existed. That night he did not sleep. He sat by the window with the sharps across his knees, and he watched the road. Around midnight he heard a horse. He rose. He waited. The horse came into the yard and stopped, and a woman's voice, low, tired, unafraid, said, Silas Kade. Don't shoot me. It's Ruth Vance. He opened the door. Ruth Vance was 53 years old and the widow of the doctor who had failed to save Marta from the fever. She had come to Silas twice a year for 11 years, once at Christmas with a jar of honey, and once in the spring with a cutting from her rose garden. And he had never invited her in, and she had never asked to come. She stood now in his doorway in a gray traveling coat, her graying hair braided back, a leather bag in her hand, and a hardness in her eyes he had never seen there before. I heard about Beeman, she said. The whole valley's heard. He tried to buy a girl from the home last winter, and the sister who refused him is dead now. Fell down the stairs, they say. She didn't fall. Silas said nothing. I know you have her, Ruth said. Old Pete saw you carry a bundle from the orchard. Pete drinks, but Pete sees. Silas, I've come to help. If you'll let me. He looked at this woman he had kept at arm's length for 11 years, because letting her closer would have meant admitting that Marta was truly gone. He looked at her tired, kind face and her steady hands, and the leather bag that he knew, without asking, contained her husband's old pistol and a change of clothes for a child. Come in, he said. The kettle's still warm. She stayed. She slept in Marta's old rocking chair by the fire that first night, and by the third night she was cooking supper, and by the seventh she was teaching Wren the letters of her name on a piece of slate. The girl took to her like a plant turns to light. And Silas found himself standing in doorways watching them, unable to enter, unable to leave, because the sight of a woman braiding a child's hair in his kitchen was so beautiful and so terrible that his heart could not decide whether to break or to sing. One evening, a full week in, Ruth found him out at the cottonwood. He was pulling weeds from around Marta's stone. He didn't look up when she sat down beside him. She would have loved that child, Ruth said quietly. I know it. She would have loved you finding her. He was silent a long time. Then, so soft she almost missed it. I don't know how to do this, Ruth. I don't know how to keep something good again. Last time I tried, I buried it. Ruth put her hand over his on the cool grass. Her palm was warm. Her voice, when it came, was the line he would carry with him until the day he died. Silas, she said, the burying wasn't the failing. The failing would be refusing to plant anything else. He did not answer. There was nothing to add to that. What would you have done if you were Silas Kade, 61 years old, a ranch you couldn't leave, a girl the law was hunting, and a good woman offering to stand in the storm with you? Would you have trusted her? Would you have let her stay? Sit with that a moment. Then let me tell you what came next, because Beeman was not a man who forgot a promise, and he had promised paper. The paper came on a Tuesday. A county writ, signed by a judge Beeman owned, ordering the return of one Wren Halloran, minor ward of the state, to the custody of the Trinidad County Children's Home. For riders again, and this time a fifth, a young marshal with a face like a boy who has not yet been asked to do something he cannot live with. Silas met them at the gate with the sharps across his forearm, not raised. Ruth stood on the porch with the doctor's pistol in her apron pocket. Wren was in the cellar again, with the wooden horse, and the word cottonwood held under her tongue like a prayer. Step aside, Mr. Kade, Beeman said pleasantly. Paper is paper. Paper is paper, Silas agreed. Read it out. Every word of it. Loud, so my wife can hear you from where she's buried. Beeman's smile faltered for the first time. What? Read it. Every word. The young marshal, his name, Silas would learn later, was Silas Kade, cleared his throat and began to read. He read the writ. He read the names on it. He read the judge's name. And Silas, who had spent 3 nights at the kitchen table with Ruth and a lamp and every piece of paper he owned, listened until he heard the exact phrase he had been waiting for. Signed by the Honorable Judge Harlan Beeman. The marshal read, Trinidad County. Stop. Silas's voice cut across the yard like a wire. Read that name again, son. The marshal read it again. Slow. And he heard it himself this time. Harlan Beeman. Josiah Beeman. He looked at the writ. He looked at the deputy. He looked at the writ again. And the color went out of his young face like water out of a cracked jug. Your brother, the marshal said quietly, signed a writ for your business. That's not against the law, Beeman said. It is, said Ruth, from the porch, when the guardian being appointed is you, and the payment is $100 from a Denver man named Ashcroft, who has 3 girls buried on his property that nobody will dig up because he owns the sheriff. My husband was the doctor who signed the death certificates, Mr. Beeman. He signed them wrong. He drank himself to death over what he signed. But he kept the real notes. Every one. In a tin box, which is now in the hands of a federal marshal in Pueblo, who I wrote to 9 days ago. She took a breath. Silas had never loved anyone in his life more than he loved her in that moment. The federal man rides in tomorrow, Josiah, Ruth said. You can leave now, on your own horse, with your own dignity such as it is. Or you can stay and be arrested in my friend's yard, in front of a little girl you tried to sell. Beeman's hand went for his gun. Silas had not fired the sharps in 11 years. He fired it now. Once. The shot took Beeman's revolver out of his hand and a piece of his thumb with it, and Beeman screamed and went off the horse sideways. And the 3 concerned citizens found in that instant that they were not concerned enough about anything to die for it. They put their hands up. The young marshal put his hand on his own weapon and turned it, very deliberately, toward Josiah Beeman on the ground. Deputy Beeman, Marshal Cottrell said, and his voice was steadier than a young voice had any right to be, you are under arrest. On suspicion of trafficking of minors. On suspicion of conspiracy. And on suspicion of the murder of Sister Agnes Delaney of the Trinidad County Home, who did not fall down those stairs. He looked up at Silas. He looked at Ruth. He looked at the small, pale face that had crept, against every instruction, to the crack of the cellar door. Sir, the marshal said to Silas, I believe the child is safe here. I'll say so in my report. If this story is finding you tonight, if you have ever waited a long time for the world to turn right side up, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like, a subscribe, a moment of your evening tells us to keep telling these stories. Now stay with me. The storm has passed. But the best part is always what grows in the ground the storm turned over. The federal man rode in the next day, as promised, and he stayed 3 days, and by the end of the week Josiah Beeman was in a cell in Pueblo, and his brother the judge had been removed from the bench, and the Denver man named Ashcroft had been arrested in his own dining room. The 3 girls in the field were dug up and given names again and buried proper, with stones and with prayers, and with a whole valley of women in black who had come to say the words nobody had said the first time. Ruth Vance stood at the front of that graveside with her hand on Wren's small shoulder, and when it was done she walked back to Silas Kade's ranch, and she did not go home. Silas asked her, on the porch that evening, if she would consider staying. Ruth looked at him a long time. She was 53 years old, and she had been a widow for 11 years, and she had loved this quiet, stubborn man across a valley of grief for most of them. "I considered it the day I came," she said. "I've been waiting on you to catch up." He laughed. It was a rusty sound. It was the first laugh out of Silas Kade in 9 years, and Wren, who was in the yard chasing a chicken with more enthusiasm than skill, stopped and turned and stared at him like a child hearing a song she had almost forgotten. They were married in the spring, under the cottonwood, by a circuit preacher who had known Marta and who cried through most of the ceremony. Wren carried the flowers. She wore new shoes. She had learned, by then, to write her whole name, Wren Halloran Kade, because Silas had adopted her on a Friday in April, and Ruth had signed the papers as her mother on the same afternoon, and the judge who signed off on it was a new judge, a woman judge out of Denver, who read the file and looked over her spectacles at the three of them standing in her chambers and said, "I have signed many papers in this office. None of them have given me this much pleasure." The ranch changed. Silas hired 2 hands, and then 3. Ruth's roses climbed the porch. Wren grew tall, and then taller, and she was reading Dickens by 11 and treating sick calves by 13, and, at 15, she stood in front of the Trinidad County home, rebuilt now, run by Sister Agnes's cousin, honest as sunrise, and she read aloud the names of every child who had passed through it in the bad years, so that none of them would be forgotten. She became a doctor. Of course she did. Ruth taught her the first of it, and the university in Denver taught her the rest, and she came home every summer to the ranch, and she rode out with Silas to check the herd, and she teased him about his silver hair, and he pretended to be gruff about it, and neither of them was fooled. Silas Kade lived to be 84. He died on a warm September afternoon in the same bed where he had once laid a barefoot orphan girl on his dead wife's quilt. Ruth was holding one of his hands. Wren, Dr. Kade now, 32 years old, with a husband of her own and a daughter named Marta, was holding the other. He said something at the very end that Ruth would repeat, later, to anyone who asked how a hard old rancher had come to have such a soft death. "Ruth," he said, his eyes on the ceiling and past it, "tell Marta I planted the other thing. Tell her it grew." The last apples of that season fell in October. Wren's daughter, for years old, gathered them in the hem of her dress in the same orchard where her mother had once stood barefoot and shaking, choking on stolen fruit in the dawn light. She carried them to her grandmother Ruth on the porch, and Ruth, 76 years old, silver-haired, still straight-backed, took one and bit into it and closed her eyes, and the taste of that apple was the taste of every good thing that had come after one cold morning when a lonely man had lowered a rifle and said, "Sit down and eat more." The wind moved through the cottonwoods. The mountains went gold, then rose, then the deep blue of evening. And somewhere behind the house, in a small family plot with 3 stones now instead of 1, the wind read the names aloud to no one in particular, Marta and Silas, and a sister named Agnes who was buried beside them because Ruth had insisted, and because a family, Ruth had said, is not only the people who share your blood. It is the people who would have stood in the yard with you when the paper came. The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back then, over the orchard, over the roses, over the small girl running down the porch steps into the last of the light, an apple in each hand, laughing. Next, we'll tell you the story of a widowed schoolteacher who inherited a failing cattle ranch from a father who never once wrote to her, and the scarred foreman who had loved her father like his own, and who met her at the depot with a wagon, a folded letter she was never meant to read, and a truth about her family that would change everything she thought she knew. Stay with us. We'll be right here when you're ready.